couple of you have been asking for me to share a few more details about my specific Cushing's case. The best way for me to describe it is I kept going to doctors and they kept saying things like, "That's really strange," without a specific answer. My primary doctor was just shocked at how little sleep I was getting and how much medication I had to be on for sleep. I also had to increase the dose of my blood pressure medication, which was kind of funny because I'm a pretty healthy guy and I work out all the time. Another strange thing is that my sex drive dropped dramatically, and I had my testosterone tested and it was really, really low. A final very weird thing that happened is I started getting a spot in the center of my right eye, a vision issue called chronic serous chorioretinopathy. Very rare in the normal population, but it turns out very common in Cushing's disease. The doctor that actually found it was a naturopath. So I had a test done called the Dutch hormone test, which is dried urine test for changing hormones, I think, or something like that. And you can get this from many naturopaths. And what it does is you actually pee on a card 5 times during the day, and then they measure your different hormone levels. So about 10 days after I did that test, I got a call from my naturopath, and she said something to the effect of, "You need to see an endocrinologist immediately. I've never seen levels this high." And what the specific giveaway was in my case was that it wasn't just that my testosterone was low and I had a couple of ratios. It was that my cortisol levels were high throughout the day and especially at night. Cortisol is a stress hormone, and it's actually pretty natural for it to be high in the morning. Your body actually wakes you up using cortisol. It's one of the reasons why coffee isn't recommended for the first 90 minutes after you wake up. But if it's still happening at night, sometimes there's a different source of it. It's either very high stress, it can be things like alcoholism, etc. Obviously, that wasn't a problem for me. In my case, the cause was a little tumor on my pituitary gland, which was producing hormones, which were causing me to have excessive levels of cortisol. Now, this is something a lot of doctors get wrong. If they think you have Cushing's disease, if you have things like weight gain, stretch marks, easy bruising, they'll often do a cortisol test, but they'll do it in the morning. And the thing is, that's very not predictive. If you really want to know whether you have Cushing's, the key test is a disease called a midnight salivary cortisol. There are others, but that's the one with the best proof behind it. It's also the cheapest and easiest. You can in fact get it online. When I did see an endocrinologist, which I was lucky enough to see pretty early on, she did a whole barrage of tests and my results were just off the charts. Now keep in mind, this is rare. I had ACTH of 140. The normal's I think the top end of normal is about 40, and many people with Cushing's have 60 or 70, so I was really off the charts on ACTH. I had really off the charts results on free cortisol. That's another test where you just pee in a bottle for 24 hours, and then they measure how much cortisol your body is disposing of in the excess. So I was an extremely obvious case, at least in terms of my blood tests, although I really wasn't in terms of my physical symptoms. The one that kept surprising people is that I hadn't put on weight. The average person with Cushing's puts on about 55 pounds. And I think I maybe put on 2 or 3 pounds this whole time. Now, where I held the weight had changed quite a bit. I had more weight in my belly. My pants weren't fitting. If you look at some of my earlier videos on here, you see me at the, right at the end of Cushing's. And even though I'd been dieting, I had sort of like chubbier cheeks. And then something I've talked about several times is you get a fat pad right here. And that to me is one of the telltale signs, is when you get fat here, which is a very strange place for people to get fat, even if they are overweight in the rest of their body. I was diagnosed in July, and then a bunch of confirmatory tests for pituitary scans, and I had something called IPSS, which is a very miserable procedure, sorry to inform you, which determined that the tumor was on the side, which it was showing up on the MRI. And in late October of last year, I had pituitary surgery. I had a small tumor removed, as well as something called a Rathke's cyst. It took me about 4 weeks to recover from that surgery, which is pretty surprising given it's brain surgery. I was lifting weights 4 weeks later, no problem. I mean, I didn't feel perfect, but I was pretty active and able to kind of jump right back into my activity. Work took me a little bit longer. I tried to go back to work. So it was in October. I tried to go back to work in January. I wasn't really successful at that. I was ultimately able to go back to work in February. And in terms of the recovery, it's been incredible. I mean, this is September 3rd or 4th roughly, and I am off steroids completely. So what happens is that after your surgery, they'll put you on steroids, which is funny. And there are a whole bunch of reasons for that. But essentially, they are compensating for the excessive steroids that your body was producing internally. So you actually still are kind of giving yourself Cushing's after you get the tumor removed. I know it sounds strange, but your body's become addicted to it, and weaning off it is extremely hard. So when people ask me about my recovery, I say, look, it's first quick and then really slow, because you recover from the surgery so quickly, 4 weeks, which again is shocking for brain surgery. But then you have this long drawn out process. I was on the quicker side getting off hormones at 11 months. Many people go 18 months. Many people are on them for life. But that was a very fast version of the recovery, and I can tell you it felt very, very long. During the recovery, I felt tired much of the time. You actually get something called emotional labelism, so you'll just start crying out of nowhere. You know, people say they're getting emotional or hormonal. I completely understand that now. I was not a crier, but I would just be sitting there at 7:30 in the morning and start crying. The other really prominent symptom a lot of people have is excessive joint pain. I mean, you feel like an 80-year-old person. That was the joke my wife used to say when I came down the stairs, 2 hands on the handrail. She's like, wow, I didn't realize I'd married an 80-year-old man. So you feel very frail and fragile, at least for a couple hours of the day. Another frequent symptom is nausea, and it's not a nausea that you feel like you need to throw up. You just feel sick, and that can persist for a while. And having now been through it, and the nausea, I had that pretty badly for about 2 months. I think going back and consulting with my doctor, I probably had cut my medication too quickly. And you really no need to cut your medication that quickly. I overdid it. The studies show that you don't have to do it as quickly as I did, but that was a pretty tough set of symptoms for a while. It kept me very weak. I felt very sick, very gross. It was probably not as bad as, let's say, recovering from chemotherapy, but it was pretty consistent and pretty painful. In terms of today, I am extremely active. I'm healthier than I was before Cushing's. And if I have to say there's a gift that Cushing's gave me, it's being much more attentive to my health. So I developed a lot of good habits, a lot of good dietary habits, a lot of good exercise habits. I remember in the weeks before my surgery, I was doing 6 to 7 hours of cardio a week, and that was extremely helpful in terms of recovery and also in terms of setting habits that I now do now. I eat much healthier, way less sugar, a lot more whole natural foods. And so if I had to say there was one upside of Cushing's and getting it when I was at the age and health level where I could still handle it, it's that. So if you are going down this path, I'd say a couple things. First of all, it tends to be really hard to diagnose. I would not use me as a good example. Most people really, really struggle to get a diagnosis. It can look a lot like other diseases. It is extremely rare, and it's extremely underdiagnosed. And there are people who want the diagnosis in a strange way. And there are people who probably have it and have no idea that this disease exists. So it is a very misunderstood disease, often called the most difficult to diagnose in all of endocrinology, and almost frankly in all of health in some respects. It's just really tough. It's masked by a lot of very similar symptoms. It can look like diabetes. It can look like just overweight. It can just look like aging. Your blood pressure is going up, your cholesterol is going up, you're having a hard time sleeping. It kind of sounds like aging, right? Well, that's Cushing's.